What's up? I'm Edgar Blood. This is my rig. We're going to do a little rig rundown. Start with the guitar. It's a Washburn HB15 that I got sometime around 2009. I wanted a big old junky jazz box that looked a lot like a 1950s K, because I was very inspired by Jack White when I was a youngin'. So I was like, oh, I want a guitar like that. And they were cheap back in the day. I think it was like a $350 guitar that I got for maybe $280 or something, used from Guitar Center a long time ago. Yeah, it's got a single mini humbucker, the stock one that it came with. Nothing crazy. Does feedback pretty bad, but it's controllable. It sounds kind of good. When I was younger, it took a dive and headstock broke, so I'll show a little close-up of that. It's got Gorilla Glue, glued it back together. Good times. Probably fell when I was drinking, to be honest, but yeah. I use the D'Addario. They're the Jazz Light EJ21 with a wound third. I find that the wound third actually helps keep it in tune a little bit. I tune to E flat. It is very mid-rangey when it goes through the amp. We'll go to the amps here in a sec. Got a lot of mid-range, very boxy, very honky, lots of growl. You know, it just has, the pickup is not very hot at all, so I have to crank the amp a little bit. And I think that has some weird relationship with the amp that I'm using, which I'll do the amps next. But yeah, trusty, and it actually doesn't go out of tune that much. You'd be surprised. Plus I can play it, use it to write a lot of my music when I'm not playing shows. I can hang it up on the wall and pick it up and play it like an acoustic guitar and plug it in and rock the fuck out, basically. Move on to the amps. We'll start with the guitar amp. This is a Fender FM 212R. Yeah, that's a 100-watt solid-state practice amp from back in the day. I think I got it around 2004 as my first big boy amp. A little thing about it is that it actually didn't get a whole lot of love when I first bought it because it surprisingly doesn't sound that great. I know that's a kind of a stretch. That's kind of where the relationship between this guitar and this amp work really well. For whatever reason, it sounds great to me. I love the way it sounds, but if I use any other guitar, I have a lot of Epiphone SGs and Gibson Explorer and all this fun stuff, Airlines, and it doesn't sound that great with other guitars, but with this guitar, for some reason, I have some weird relationship with maybe how hot the pickup is, certain things about the characteristics of this guitar. I do use the onboard crunch distortion channel. It's just barely cracked open, but a lot of the driven tone that's on the records and when I play at shows is actually just straight from the amp. The signal from the guitar gets split up a bunch of ways. We'll go over that when I do the pedal board, but for the most part, the Fender amp is really just getting the guitar. There's no distortion pedals or compression or anything like that. It's just straight. Technically, it goes straight in, but it does. The guitar signal gets split up a bunch of crazy ways. So yeah, another thing is it didn't have the stock speakers in it anymore, and I thought it used to sound great when it was the stock speakers, but one of them blew, and I had to find some replacement speakers, and they don't make the original speakers standalone. You have to probably buy another FM 212R and gut it and take those speakers. But I found a dude in Oakland that I was actually selling the Eminence-made version of it. And they do it. It sounds a little different, but I'm happy with it. I've got my amp back. Obviously, it's been retolexed white, and all of the grill cloth's white, and the pilot light's white. Everything's, you know, whited out. Kind of the shtick. Yeah, gives it a little more custom look, I think. It's nice for I think a $300 amp or something. They're cheap. So then moving on to the Silvertone 1465, a solid state 150. I guess they were in production between 66 and 68, and I don't know where in that timeline this guy was from, but I actually got this as a gift from one of my good friends, Josh. And we kind of traded it back and forth, and eventually it was kind of like, you use it way more than me, so cheers. I was like, oh, thanks. It originally didn't have the grounded plug on it, so I had to put one on because it shocked the crap out of me when I was practicing in the garage a long time ago. And it, yeah. They're interesting because there really isn't a whole lot of tone to the amp itself. It's very early solid state technology back in the day, made by Dan Electro and then rebranded Silvertone and sold at Sears. But it really doesn't have a tone. I guess it's a really good pedal platformer. I kind of shaped the tone with pedals for this rig because it's a bass and it is a guitar cabinet and a very wheezy old solid state amp, but it's definitely just power. Yeah, it's the way I got it set it up. When you're right next to it, it's fucking loud, and that's matched with the Mahler 412, made by Jared. It's a great cabinet. I kind of told him, oh, I want something kind of like a PPC, an orange PPC 412, but I want white Tolex and white grill cloth. He obliged, he made it and did a phenomenal job. It's this head with this cab does the kind of bass tone. I actually also drive the organ into it, and it does have in some songs live, I'll throw the organ on just to give a little bit more fullness to the live sound. But this rig handles the bass and the organ, and it does it very well. I'm very happy with it.
I am the boy, I am forever, everlasting pain and suffering.
All right, so here we have the pedal board and various pedals that are surrounding it. It's kind of the brains of the system to let me split it all up a bunch of different ways. The guitar goes into the TU2 tuner to tune and also to mute in between songs because everything is so freaking loud. From there, it goes into the radial big shot. That does all the splitting. It also has the ground lift and the ISO, so I can kind of chill out, 2 amps at the same time. It took me a while to figure out the ground lifting and everything to, isolation transformers to get rid of the hum that it kind of comes with trying to split one guitar to 2 amps. Yeah, so from there, output A goes to the little control center, as I call it, the control pedal, which I'll explain that in a little bit. And then output B goes into a EHX C9 organ machine. I think I just have it on the generic tone wheel setting, kind of a Hammond-ish kind of sound. Yeah, so the thing about it is when you turn it on and off, on the wet out, the organ out, it'll actually just switch between guitar and organ so that you can engage it and have the organ sound. But that's kind of not useful because I'm trying to keep things muted and unmuted while I'm playing. So I actually leave the C9 on all the time, and then from there I made this latch mute. So if I turn it on and off, it'll kind of just mute it and leave it on or leave it off. That way I can just leave that on all the time. Then the dry out which will still sound like a guitar, will go to the pitchfork. The pitchfork drops it down an octave. And then from there it goes into a Behringer VT999 is kind of a tube pre. I think it's their take on a EHX hot tubes, and it's even in a little Electro-Harmonix big box style chassis, kind of looking like a hot tubes or a deluxe Memory Man or something. It has a little built-in gate that I do utilize because even though the lift and the ISO on the Big Shot chill things out a lot, the pitchfork adds kind of a weird digital artifact thing, or some funny stuff going on. So the gate chills it out when I'm not playing. So then, yeah, the output A of the Big Shot, the latch mute for the C9, and then the output for the bass kind of go over to this control brain center box. Basically 3 individual momentary mutes. So when your foot's on it, it'll mute it. The minute you take your foot off, it unmutes. And I kind of always keep them bass, organ, guitar. They're all individual, 6 or 3 in, 3 out. And what that does is allows me to kind of create the dynamics while I'm playing live. So this one, if my foot's here on the snare, I can put my heel down and mute the bass, which is kind of what I use the most of, is muting the bass, because I could add dynamics for intros or bridges and all the different stuff. Adding this box though, because before I was using an Electro-Harmonix chill switch or kill switch or whatever, to mute just the bass, and that's all I was able to mute until I made this, which is just momentary mute circuits are very easy. So then now I can mute the bass and the organ at the same time, and then I can lift it and pull everything in, or sometimes if I keep the organ off for certain songs, I can mute just the guitar and have just bass. So I'm excited to play around with it more. It's still a learning curve really, because I'm wanting to add that dynamics, make it sound like, you know, more than one person kind of sound. And this thing is definitely helping me do that. So then this is kind of the bird's eye view, the commander's chair. This is what I see when I look down. Yeah, we'll do a little quick thing on the drum. So I use DW7000. It was actually part of a double kick pedal. And I, made my own little sticks out of, take a drumstick, and I used a nail and some Gorilla Glue and drilled a little pilot hole and glued it in there, and you can use it in a foot pedal. Interestingly enough, most of my hardware is actually just a hodgepodge of different things. The PDP hi-hat stand is almost, it took me a long time to realize that it was very important to the setup, just because it's 2 legs and they're double braced, but they can swivel all the way around, so I can park it right next to the kick drum. And that's really what, originally when I started, it was a snare, kick, and the hats, and that was it. I added the whole cymbal configuration later. But it's definitely really important to have that hi-hat be able to be parked that close to the kick drum or the kick pedal. The other thing that's pretty important is the Ludwig snare stand is one of the double braced high snare stands that allows a bigger footprint for the tripod, because putting your snare sideways is, an interesting thing to do for the one-man band situation. But so yeah, it's a Pearl Forum kit that I kind of customized. Obviously, it's got a white Tolex and blood splatter hoop kick drum, 18x22, 14-inch snare that again is a Pearl Forum snare, but I kind of customized a little bit, Edgar Blood style. My favorite cymbals that I use, that I have had for a while, actually the drummer in my old band got them first. I fell in love with them, so I bought my own, are the Sabian XS20 14-inch hats and 20-inch medium ride. I call it a crash ride just because when you lay into it, it's loud and it sounds more of like just like a big, it's very crashable ride basically. But of course, for the ride cymbal, the thing that I get asked pretty frequently is it's actually a Dixon Cajon pedal. And what it is basically a auxiliary kick pedal that you can attach to whatever you want. And so I originally was using a boom arm from a ride stand. Ended up having to get a new one because mounting it on the kick drum made it so it would swivel, and in the middle of a set, the cymbal would start tilting in weird ways because I was beating the crap out of it. But so yeah, the brake cable actually wears after time, you know, beating the crap out of a cymbal with it. Not really what it was originally intended for, but in the brochure for the Dixon Cajon pedal, it says, oh, you can use it to hit a cymbal. Probably not as much as I do, maybe for like one-off hits, but like I straight up ride on the crash with the pedal, so it's getting a lot of abuse. So I learned how to replace the cable and replace it every 6 months or so. It actually lasts quite a while.
She bites me, pulls my hair.
So yeah, now I got a little Q&A section. I put it out on Instagram. If anybody had any questions. So we'll take the first question is, do you use natural or pedal distortion? So yeah, it's the onboard crunch channel on the FM 212R. So the next question is, do you put anything on your snare head so the beater doesn't tear through after use? And I think that kind of works well with the next question, which is, how do you get your snare positioned well enough for the pedal? So no, I don't put anything on the snare. Kind of a interesting thing is when I first started doing it, I was making it so that the tip of you're thinking, oh, you want to hit the stick on the snare drum like you would be playing it. So I was trying to make it so that the tip would hit the head. And what that did was make a very kind of thin, you know, weird sound. It wasn't very, didn't have enough punch, enough attack to the snare, especially one of the main things that most people don't realize playing with a snare this way, a lot of other one-man bands, is your snare has a different sound from on top and the sides and the bottom. And when somebody's out in the audience, they're not hearing the snare that you're hearing behind it. They're hearing basically what is the bottom of the snare. So I have to tune it, you know, I've a lot of trial and error. A lot of this is trial and error, obviously, but one of my buddies who's a sound engineer went and saw me play, and he was like, yo, the snare, you probably don't realize it, but you know, when you're out in the audience, you're hearing the bottom of the snare. And I was like, oh, which is a very like tacky, thin sounding, usually, depending on how you tune it. A lot of people tune the bottom head, you know, pretty tight or whatever to try and get, you know, good snare response out of the head and the snares themselves. But what I did is I actually tune it really loose. I tuned the batter head pretty loose. So it's got a very kind of baseball bat through the cake kind of sound, just a whap, very whappy. And one of the ways to get that is actually to not have the tip hit the batter head, as I actually position it so that the broad side of the stick is hitting the head. It's like more surface area on the batter head. And you know, you're using your foot, yeah, your hand can smack a snare pretty hard, but your foot on a lever and a pulley pushing it, you know, adding that much more force actually makes it so that the snare is pretty freaking loud in an acoustic setting without it being mic'd or anything, which is good for small clubs and venues. But the bigger you get, and then you mic it, that's the best for a one-man band, because then the audience is hearing the top of the snare. So yeah, now I don't put anything on the head and use the broad side of the stick to hit the head. So the next, how do you get bass tone even with multiple strings are in range to be picked up? I guess, is it an eternal balancing struggle? Did you find the right setting? So originally I was using a Whammy WH4, which is not polyphonic. And so this amp driving the bass was very garbled sounding and very muddy. You know, you can play one note and then the WH4 will make it just nice and solid and it'll sound great. The minute you play two or even a full chord, it just turns into garbage. It was useless. And in fact, it was an older WH4, so I had to recalibrate it very frequently. And so what would happen was I would sound horrendously out of tune. Even though I wasn't out of tune, I would sound horrendously out of tune, like from the audience perspective. And I only played like 2 shows with the WH4 before I was like, this isn't gonna work. So I did a lot of research on, you know, octave pedals just to find what's going to be the right one. I ended up picking the Pitchfork. I like electroharmonics a lot, so it kind of ended up being between the Pitchfork and the Pog, the Micro, and I watched so many A/B shootout comparison videos, and ultimately the Pitchfork won mainly because it also had extra stuff it could do, and I thought that the 1 octave down sound on the Pitchfork was a little bit more authentic. It sounded like string. It didn't sound kind of like a synth kind of octave down. And which is interesting because I use the Behringer tube pre. I really loved Lemmy Kilmister's tone, so I was like, if I'm going to do this 1 octave down thing and create a bass tone, like I want to get that Lemmy just like ripping, just gnarly bass tone. And no, everything is getting pushed down 1 octave. So when I'm playing a chord, the guitar amp is playing a chord and the bass amp is playing a chord. I guess that ties into like the playing, trying to do like double stops and things where I guess in classical playing, they'll do a lot of you know, your bass clef and your treble clef, and your hands are doing all this crazy stuff. I don't know how to do it, but I utilize harmonies a lot so that I can get a bass sound and a guitar sound kind of at the same time. But the Pitchfork just takes everything you're playing and drops it down an octave. So that's this amp does. Have you considered playing a more traditional electric guitar? Yes and no. I actually bring a backup guitar when I play out, just in case this one fails or breaks or anything happens. And that is an Eastwood Airline 59T, I think is what it's called. It's their like Telecaster Airline. I'll put a close-up of that here. I use that just in case, but I have never had to use it live. This guitar, surprisingly, is robust and it can take a beating, and I play the crap out of it. And yeah, it barely even goes out of tune, let alone needing to just scrap it in the middle of a set and switch to the backup guitar. So yeah, the Eastwood Airline, I guess technically, if something were to happen to this, that would be the next guitar that I would like make the main guitar. The next question is how your feet do the beep boop on the bop bop. So when I first started trying to do the beep boop on the bop bop, it would, you know, wasn't very good. It took some coordinating, and I wanted some psh psh in my boom boom. So whatever that means. So basically, I guess is how you're doing this with your feet. I'm not playing anything too complex, obviously. I'm trying to make it a little bit more, and that's coming with a lot more practice and time. But one of the main things is I was in a metal band and played, you know, lots of double bass pedal work as a drummer. And so that helped a lot, surprisingly. You know, it's kind of the age-old thing of the old bluesmen back in the day tapping their foot and playing like slide or whatever. It's like, you know, if you can keep time with your foot tapping, just put a kick pedal in front of it and it's the same thing. Getting the left foot to cooperate took some time, some practice, but it's definitely a coordination thing. So yeah, then the last question is, what picks do I use, which is interesting. Didn't think anybody cared that much, but so yeah, I got these Edgar Blood picks custom from Custom Pick World or some such, and they're 1mm Delrin, kind of like Tortex Dunlop style. They're good. I like them. And if I've sent you anything, I probably gave you some. These are the picks I use. So there you go.